Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2024. Confetti for the new year. Today's date is January 4th, 2024, and the local time is 11:57. So we are going to begin in 3 minutes from now, or something like that, and we'll try to get this going. Are we 5 by 5? We are. Okay, terrific. So just like in the last episode, I started 10 minutes ago. We had more than 300 live viewers, and there was a crackle in the microphone. So I've hustled to restart, reboot the computer, get everything up and running again. So if you're watching this in replay, which is most of you, I'll put a chapter title at the beginning of the program. It's probably going to be more than 5 minutes from now, just because I want things to get settled down, get myself settled down, get things ready to go. Vinman's Bakery says it sounds great. You've got to love it. Vinman's Bakery in beautiful downtown Ellensburg. You've got to love it. So give me a second, would you please? I need to find the live chat. Find us here as people are rolling in from the other stream. And yeah, I'm officially tired of this scramble drill, but at some point I'll figure out why sometimes I have a crackling microphone. There's always things to learn. That's part of the fun, I guess. But it does make it hard when I'm ready to go mentally with the content and I'm suddenly shifting to something else, which is just thinking about this stuff. Go with it, baby, says Jean. Okay, Jean's from my hometown in Wisconsin. Wonderful. So let's test that I have a working desktop, and I do. And an overhead, I do. And the shelf cam is a live shot, and the corner cam could be a little higher, but I guess we're not going to worry about that. There's bigger fish to fry here at the moment. Okay, where are you viewing from? It's still going to be another 5 minutes before we begin. I just need to get my blood pressure down. Where are you viewing from? I'll just read right here. Momel, Arkansas. Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. That's Brian, maybe on vacation. I don't know, Brian. Ritzville, Washington. Marion, Virginia. Scrolling way too fast. Brimville, Illinois. Boone, North Carolina. Rogue Valley, Oregon. If you're all saying crackle, it's all just going to zoom by. I'm not even going to see it. Finland, Budapest, Kamloops, BC. Thank you, live viewers, for figuring out how to find this stream and leaving the old one. We're all pros at this by now. Okay, good. Fairbanks, Alaska. Don says it's +5 Fahrenheit. Yes, we have same weather every day. Same frickin' weather every day. A couple of quick announcements, and then I have to take my walk and get my head right. So, you know that, well, I'll just announce this in a bit. But our Friday noon lectures are beginning tomorrow. Some of you take the time to tune in and watch our noon geology seminars in the auditorium, and we have the whole geology department there. And this is tomorrow, Friday, January 5th at noon Pacific. Logan Weatherall will give a talk involving landslides and earthquakes in the Pacific Northwest. Should be a good one. And then Kelly Wall from the USGS on January 19th, Susan Kaspari from our department on the 26th, Marie Takach on February 9th, and finally Anthony Schoen from Spokane on March 1st. So all 5 of these you can put on your calendar if you like, and if you want to be with us live, that's wonderful, but these also will be available in replay form. Yeah, school has started. The students are all showing up like 15 minutes before the start of their class. That doesn't last long, but everybody wants to find the room properly, and everybody's looking lost, but they try to look cool at the same time. And so, there's plenty of students dropping in, and, my day job is full, and yet I'm continuing to roll with these episodes. And I think this will be a good one. If I can get my head right, I think this one will be good. So we have more than 400 live, and I think we're going to start at 12:05. which is about 4 minutes from now. So I'm going to give you a quick shot out the window. I'm going to walk around the building, get my head right, and then we will begin just a few minutes late. Thank you, everybody. Can I check one more time before I take my walk? Are we? Please say it. You might have to lie to me now. I don't know. No, I don't want you to lie to me, but are we 5x5? Okay. We solved the mic thing? Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us live or in replay. We'll begin the program in a handful of minutes. Hot mic. Okay. This is a scrambled show. This is a hot mic. I'm muttering to myself. This is a scrambled show. Sometimes they're the best ones that you do, boy. You don't know the order. You have no idea how it's going to happen, but you've got a bunch of material. There's no shortage of material. So just lean into it. Just lean into it. Pressure's off. You can go take a walk in 2 hours and just think about other things. But for the next couple of hours, you're thinking about this. Just get yourself in the zone and let's go. Right? A pleasant good afternoon to you all, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. This is an Ice Age Floods live stream series, A to Z, and this is episode M, Columbia Submergence. It's an interesting title, maybe a confusing title. I need to define what that is. And right up front, let me say that this is part one of 2 episodes, essentially on the Columbia River Gorge, the famous bottleneck, the famous narrow gorge that threads through the Cascade Mountain Range. It's a mountain range with a river going right through the middle of it. And today is a solo show, but Sunday we'll have a guest, USGS geologist Jim O'Connor, who knows the Columbia River Gorge geology better than anybody. That's an easy statement to make. He knows it better than anybody. And so the pressure's off in a way where I can lob things out today, make sure that Jim watches this show live or in replay, and then we'll just go to him mostly on Sunday. At least that's my tentative plan. But it is a potpourri today. I have all sorts of stuff. And the question is, well, will I remember to go to all these different things and bring them in for us to feast on? But let's look at the schedule first of all to make sure we know what's happening. So, yeah, we're on it now. If you want to join us live, you know that these happen every Thursday at noon and every Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific time through the rest of the winter. And I made a new calendar for January. Daddy's proud of himself. Happy New Year, everybody. And so here we are today on Thursday, January 4th. And here's 9 a.m. Episode N. We'll have Jim O'Connor with us. So Columbia River Gorge, Columbia River Gorge. And then as promised, for the first time officially, we will be in Eastern Washington with this series and will be based out of Spokane. I'm not going there physically. I think you know that, right? I think you know that. I'm not actually saying I'm going to Spokane, Washington and live streaming from there. I'm not saying that. But we're finally going to be in Eastern Washington for sure with Ice Age floods. And I'll say it right now. Our featured player, our featured subject a week from today will be a high school teacher named Thomas Large. And there's all sorts of good stuff involving that, which most of which I haven't even looked at yet, but has been flooding in, no pun intended, by email. So plenty coming there. I'm particularly excited for that. But yes, today and Sunday, Columbia River Gorge. That's the idea. Okay, let me set the hook. Since there's so much that I'm hoping to fold into this episode, let me go right to it. Let me hit the main meal for this episode right now. Columbia Submergence. Okay, well, Columbia, what's that mean? Columbia River Gorge. Okay. Submergence. What, underwater? Yep. Why am I saying that? Columbia Submergence. Well, that's what our buddy Harley Bretz said in 1919. There's a paper. The last paper that Bretz wrote before he started his famous Scablands work in Eastern Washington. 1919. You want to look at it? We're gonna dig into it in gory detail at some point today. But let's get the headline out. So the paper looks like this. And is it available for you to read online? Of course it is. And there's a bunch of other things waiting for you as well. But this is the paper, The Late Pleistocene Submergence of the Columbia Valley of Oregon and Washington. J. Harlan Bretz, he's a faculty member now at the University of Chicago, published in the fall of 1919. And the fall of 1919 is important. And yeah, I'm eventually going to go detail by detail through this paper. But I'm still just trying to set the hook. In case you're thinking of leaving, I'm trying to get you to stay. And we have almost 700 now watching live. Okay, here's the best way I can say, here's where we're going today, and this is the main concept. Oh, I'll tease it a little bit more. The Bretz story has been told a bunch of times. I've heard regularly over the years, there's only one scientific paper that J. Harlan Bretz regretted publishing. It's a paper that he thought was a mistake. It's a paper that he wished he could just have go away and have nobody read. And it's this paper today from 1919. And I hadn't really read the paper carefully until this week, getting ready for you guys today. And I really enjoyed the paper. There's a lot to really love about this paper on Columbia Submergence. So why are we spending a whole episode on a paper that Bretz regretted? Well, I'll do it verbally and then we'll look at the map. Bretz's Columbia Submergence was putting forth the idea that much of today's Columbia River Valley You can start at the mouth of the Astoria Fan. You can go all past Portland. You can go upstream on the Columbia into the Columbia River Gorge, Hood River, the Dalles. You can go Biggs Junction. You can keep going. You can go. Are you with me mentally? If you're in France, you're like, no, but Tri-Cities. Now we're into Eastern Washington. Bretz in this 1919 paper is saying it's all under static water. It's all under water that's still, static water. And that still water that is submerging much of the Pacific Northwest goes all the way up to Chelan, Washington. So in a way, we are in Eastern Washington today with Bretz, even though it's a paper from 1919, and I think the field work is in 1916. And you're like, well, don't we believe that? Don't we believe those areas were underwater, even down to Eugene, Oregon? Yeah, we do. That's Ice Age floods country. And you're like, well, so he figured it out. Why does he think it was a mistake? In the 1919 paper, Bretz says it's saltwater. It's the Pacific Ocean water encroaching into land and flooding this portion of the Pacific Northwest, similar to the St. Lawrence Seaway today. Let's look at the map. So here's the one and only visual from this paper. It's towards the back of the paper. And Bretz has us looking at, this is me this morning in a blue pencil, no significance, by the way. Yes, he knows about the terminal moraine of the ice sheet. And Bretz in this 1919 paper says we have a Columbia Submergence, and everything between Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Tri-Cities, Washington, Yakima, Washington, and up to Chelan, Washington was under water, static water. So can you see why he regretted it? I guess so. Like he's saying, we got salt water coming in this far. But how he gets to that idea, not only with his own work as a young faculty member with the University of Chicago and some of his graduate students, but also him reading prior work and involving that in his paper. That's the exciting thing for me. Before Thanksgiving, when we started this series, I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan. And I said, well, I guess I'll just start with some of these early workers that maybe Bretz was reading, but I'm not really sure he was. You remember? Simons, Russell, and so on. Willis, Chamberlain, Salisbury. Well, I was gleeful when I finally cracked this 1919 paper open, which we're about to do. And his first section is going through the previous work. I mean, it was a blast to just see that. Okay, so I'm seeing you, saltwater, what? Chamberlain, who's that? So you're engaged. You're engaged in this idea, and we're approaching 800 viewers now, so that's a good thing. Okay, well, that's the attempt to hook you. How are we going to do this? Let's try this. Let's go to the slides and get started at least. And we're not going to go full screen. We're just going to go kind of like that. So here's a splendid map from Joel Gombiner, and with some modern kind of magic that he's using. And here's Portland. And if you're watching from far, far away, here's the Columbia River today flowing from east to west. Here's the Hood River area. So Hood River's to the south, through Cascade, Locks, Portland, and on. Mount St. Helens, y'all know. Mount Adams, a little town called Goldendale, and the lower Yakima Valley is up in here. Keep it moving. So I had to look up what Champlain Submergence actually was, because that's mentioned in Bretz's paper. And this is, just from Googling it on today's internet, it gives me this concept that here's this saltwater, I guess today or in the Ice Age, I'm not even really sure what I'm talking about, But it's the concept which was popular 100 plus years ago of this salt water coming in Quebec, Montreal, Ottawa. And you're like, my God, this guy doesn't even know about this? No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So how can I read more about the Champlain submergence? Well, I can go to a 3-volume set of beautiful books that arrived in the mail yesterday. Thanks to Pat from Natchez. Pat from Natchez. Pat from Natchez says, I think you need the 3-volume set, the textbook series from Chamberlain and Salisbury. And Pat, I don't know how much these cost, but I'm sure it wasn't cheap. And I thank you so much for this set. I'll take good care of this set and make sure that others in the department know about it. But if I go to volume 3, let's crack it open and take a look and read more about the Champlain submergence as Bretz was doing. So volume 3, these are Bretz's 2 mentors at the University of Chicago. This is originally from the collection of Howard Macaulay and published in 1907. That's a solid decade before Bretz is doing this work. Ignore the phone, please. Dynamite. Okay, I have bookmarked. A stage later than that represented in figure 520. The shaded area represents the track which is thought to have been covered by seawater. After Taylor. So Taylor, I think, is one of the University of Michigan guys who was at Russell's house with Bretz, encouraging those guys to get out. But anyway, this Champlain Sea, this Champlain idea was big, I think, at the day. And I'm not going to read more here. Just enjoy Pat from Natchez's gift. But I just want you to notice these maps. Also after Taylor. Look at this. This certain look. Does this look familiar to you, where you put an ice sheet in and you have it kind of hatched a little bit like this, almost to give it a 3D effect? That's what Bretz's PhD looks like. So even this look of some of these documents and in these textbooks are directly influencing Bretz. Influencing. Elmer Fudd. Influencing. Pat from Natchez. Thank you. So to go back, again, scattered time. So, we're working on these questions. We're not working really on this today or this today or this today. We're definitely working on this again today. And you remember my question was, how much experience in Eastern Washington did Bretz have physically? And we can say for sure, in 1916, Bretz is in Eastern Washington on foot with a couple of his grad students. And we'll do some Google Earth by Glenn late today. We'll look at some notebooks late today. We'll see that's true. So we're a full 6 years before the famous beginning of the Bretz in Eastern Washington story in 1922. He's tromping around, at least in portions of Eastern Washington, in the late summer of 1916. Okay, keep it going. So back to the slides, I guess. Let's see what I have in mind here. It's going to be kind of scattered. That's right. So now I'm going to go backwards just a bit. You're like, backwards. Well, these solo shows, perhaps, so I have most of January figured out, and I have guests lined up. But I've decided that I'm going to do a solo show every once in a while. And I think, I might change my mind, but I think these solo shows are going to be a chance for us to kind of catch our breath, me kind of update you on things that have been rolling in, because again, this is a community of people who are sending all sorts of good stuff, not just gifts, but other things as well. And so occasionally we'll go backwards and just flesh some things out from past episodes. And I think it's worth doing, if nothing else, just to show how much is flowing in and how much I'm trying to just flow right back out again. I'm just a conduit for all this. So yeah, in the last episode, the Sats Up Red Gravels with Kelsey Stanton, hope you enjoyed that show. That was on New Year's Eve, the morning of New Year's Eve. We were here with Bretz's PhD, and we were thinking about how much water was flowing to the ocean and specifically what date there was. Can we get a date for the outwash gravels coming through the Chehalis River Valley and getting to Gray's Harbor? And that's one of the main messages from the last episode. Kelsey had some new dates on at least some of the gravels that are 150,000 years old. They're stage 6. And to back that up visually, going back to the last show, I'm reminding you that we had this map that worked for me. Possibly it worked for you too. And the Chehalis River, and we had the Sats Up gravels in this drainage. And Kelsey from the last show is like, we got to be careful. I think Bretz was lumping things, and all the Sats Up red gravels that he had were not necessarily all the same tectonic, the same story, the same age, the same story, the same lithologies even. And that's fine. Now, what I have not shown you from Bretz's PhD, I promise this is going to be like the most combo platter show you're ever going to have. These are all things I've been meaning to share with you. So I'm just cleaning up all the stuff in the kitchen, basically, all the scraps. So here's Bretz's map from 1913. And instead of showing it to you under the document camera, I just show you the kind of detail he had. Here is the Chehalis River Valley flowing to the ocean, and that's where our Sats Up gravels were. But he's got that divide that was being crossed. Lots of stuff here from Bretz specifically. Keep it going. Keep going to that, sorry. So we were here, and I was wondering, did we have any evidence of the stage 6, the 150,000-year-old ice, and more importantly, outwash, flowing from the margin of the Puget Lobe, in other words, the Admiralty ice, flowing to the Aberdeen. And we eventually landed, maybe I pushed Kelsey a little bit, I'm not sure, but we eventually landed on the idea. It's like, yes, I have some new dates, some new luminescence dates from the surface of this terrace that are matched on both sides of the Chehalis River Valley. And Kelsey says, that's your 150,000. If you want it, we got some of that. The biggest or the highest matching terraces, therefore the oldest red gravels of the Sats Up, she's like, be careful, that's not your stage 6 thing. And we're still not sure exactly how old that is. We might even be going pre-Pleistocene for that. But I think it's important to point out right here that at least this part of the story, Bretz was mapping, and we can now confirm that these two batches of outwash gravels flowing directly to the Pacific Ocean from the Seattle ice sheet, we have a wimpy, late, and more significant early story. Early, big, late, wimpy. We're going to keep playing with that. I'm not going to be that in love with it. Maybe on Sunday, Jim O'Connor's going to like, you got to back off of this stage 6 being the main story. I'm looking ahead now to Sunday, imagining Jim. Like, we got nothing from older than, what are you doing? We got nothing from older than 30,000 years ago in the Columbia River Gorge, and every drop of water is coming through the Columbia River Gorge. You need to get off of this. Maybe he'll say that. I don't know. But so far in our story, we have Bretz telling this story, Bretz telling this story, and Kelsey in the last show from brand new luminescence dating, having some numbers that are in the neighborhood of 150,000 years. Keep it going. So yeah, we will continue to think about this, but that's not the main focal point of today. One other thing I want to do from the last show, many of you in the live chat and even in the live question and answer were fascinated by the thought that did the Columbia River, do you remember this? Did the Columbia River used to flow into Willapa Bay? And a few of you were saying, is it even possible the Columbia River flowed into Grays Harbor? And when I made this little sketch for myself, I wasn't even thinking about this, but now I am thinking about it. And this is totally off the cuff. No way to know this for sure. Did the Columbia River used to go like this before this divide was up? Did the Columbia River used to go like this into Grays Harbor? And then possibly the Columbia River used to flow like this into Willapa Bay, and then the Columbia River flowing today to the margin. And you're like, I guess, but like, don't most people just do that? Don't most amateurs just look at maps and like go, oh, I think I see something. Like, why isn't anybody saying that? I'm trying not to do that. There is some data behind that thought. And the data is this. Do you remember we mentioned breadcrumbs last time? And a bunch of you in the live chat in the last episode and leaving comments down below were like, I can't believe this guy's never heard Hansel and Gretel. Where's this guy been? It's like, I don't know. Maybe I was told the story as a kid of Hansel and Gretel, but I conveniently forgot it. I honestly didn't know about the Hansel and Gretel thing and the breadcrumbs. So that was a riot. So I went home to Liz after the show and I saw those comments. I'm like, Liz, if I say breadcrumbs in that phrase, what comes to mind? She's like, Hansel and Gretel? Why? And I'm like, she said, you didn't say on one of your programs, did you, that you didn't know where the breadcrumbs thing came from and you just came up with some story on your own? I'm like, no, I didn't do that. No, I didn't do that. I did that. So it's a breadcrumbs episode. And if you remember the context of it, the idea was as Bretz was working his way south and leaving the Chehalis and getting into the Cowlitz, and then, of course, getting into the mouth of the Columbia, he kept finding more and more, do you remember? Quartzites. These are what quartzite river cobbles look like with a bunch of cat hairs on. What in the... Blonde quartzites. These are the breadcrumbs that got Bretz interested in Eastern Washington because he was finding more and more of these quartzite breadcrumbs, these quartzite river cobbles, a little bit in the Chehalis, plenty more in the Cowlitz, a ton down here at the mouth of the Columbia. So what did those quartzites tell him? He was writing in his Satsop paper that there is no bedrock, and Kelsey confirmed this last time, there is no major bedrock in Western Washington that's this blonde quartzite. The quartzite had to come through the Columbia River Gorge. It had to come from Eastern Washington. And so he's truly working his way up the Columbia River during this decade. Like we're pretty much between 1914 and 1919 today, 5-year span. He's working his way up the river following these breadcrumbs, these quartzite breadcrumbs. And I can't hold it. He's also following bigger breadcrumbs, big blocks of bread, angular blocks of bread, not breadcrumbs, not river stones. Bretz is starting to find these things up on the hillsides. Mostly granite, but sometimes quartzite, angular erratics, boulders that are on both walls of the Columbia River Gorge. Same idea, especially the quartzite erratics, they got to be coming from Eastern Washington. So what is going on? Stay with me. We're getting to the guts of the matter, which is looking carefully at the Bretz 1919 paper, but I'm just going backwards to do some cleanup detail. So back to the idea of, did the Columbia ever flow to Grays Harbor or Willapa Bay and now to Astoria? I emailed both Steve Rydell and Ray Wells, both geologists in their retirement years now, but authorities on the Columbia River basalts, and Wells in particular on mapping in southwestern Washington. Here's Ray Wells by email yesterday. Good questions, Nick. You're wondering about if the Columbia River ever flowed to Grays Harbor. I've always wondered how the Columbia River might have responded to the clockwise rotation and northward motion of the Cascadia forearc. I have mapped quartzite cobbles on the Columbia River basalts at 500-foot elevation along the east side of Willapa Bay. I've not seen quartzite in the Chehalis, but there might be there. I don't know if the river flowed down the Chehalis, but as I've not seen the quartzites myself, I would work your idea of a Columbia River flowing to Grays Harbor as a working hypothesis rather than fact. And Steve Rydell said more or less the same thing. Can't confirm it, but it's not a crazy thought to suggest that. Okay, just mopping up from last show. Let's keep it going with the slides. Okay, so there's a gentleman by the name of Eric. I will not give you his last name, in the Seattle area. And Vic Baker, who's a guest later this month, connected me to this fella, Eric, who's retired. And back in 2019, Eric had been working on a new biography of Bretz, to the point where Eric in Seattle, who's not a geologist, flew to Chicago and went to the Bretz papers, and is one of the few people that I know of who've actually have sat down with those papers at the University of Chicago, the Bretz notebooks that we've been talking about. And so this is right before the pandemic, and Eric from Seattle is being very helpful. He's sending me a document of, this is Bretz's mentor at Albion College. Here's Eric sending me some of the original documents that he was able to get from the University of Chicago, a letter from Bretz to Bailey Willis. You can freeze frame and read it if you like. But I'm including Eric at this point because I just found this email this morning, and it's from the fall of 2019. Basically, Eric saying, I think there's an amazing story of this Bretz stuff before 1922. And I began my work in April of 2016, and I had a rough draft a couple of years later, but I'm very dissatisfied with it. And since then, I've kind of been, I've lost my mojo, basically. So Eric started sending me, again, this is back in the fall of 2019, sending me some little snippets that I'd forgotten about, but they fit nicely into what we were doing earlier in earlier shows. In 1909, when Bretz is a high school teacher, he appealed to Willis for a technical review. And Bretz made the connection himself, possibly. Bretz was amazingly adept at making cold calls. But any one of the following well-known geologists of the day could have given an initial personalized referral. Henry Landis of the Washington Geological Survey and eventually University of Washington chair. Rollin Salisbury, Russell, and even A.C. Lane, who loaned the aneroid to Bretz back in Michigan. All of these geologists, well known in their own rights, were friends of Willis, and all were at one time or another supporter of Bretz's efforts to grow as a geologist. Salisbury, the dean of Bretz's program, was looking for someone who could take over a sizable share of the department's field courses. And Bretz showed much promise in that area. As a student at Chicago, Bretz was put to work teaching undergraduate students in the last quarter of the first year. Excuse me. Loud chatter in the hallway, distracting. So I share this with you because we're setting the stage for Bretz to start teaching field courses. Also from Eric in Seattle. Something struck me when I was digging through the smattering of files for the period of how rich and robust the curriculum was at the high school level. In fact, since I have your ear, you should have Mossback do a number on the subject of development of Seattle's educational system during that time. Some of you are in the Pacific Northwest and you watch PBS television and you know a character named Mossback. He's an author and he has video programs now on history. His name is Knut Berger, and he goes by Skip for a few folks that know him well. I don't know him that well, but I guess I can call him Skip as well. So here's Eric saying, well, you better have Mossback look into this. Well, got an email a couple days ago from Skip, from Knut Berger, and he's been watching the series along with you guys, watching them in replay. And Skip points out that he's watching episode J, and he wanted to mention that Henry Landis at the UW was married to Berthe Knight Landis, who, when elected mayor of Seattle in 1926, became the first female mayor of a major American city. I did a Mossback episode on that some years ago. The Landises were a power couple. She was a reform mayor, and as happened back in the day, she was voted out during the city's oscillation between corrupt mayors and reform mayors. Anyway, she had guts. All right. So Eric continues to send things. This is mostly back from 2019, but I've made contact with him more recently, and Eric is talking about Landis as well. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting to today's topic. It is a kitchen sink show for sure. This is not a quartzite, but remember that these little breadcrumbs within the Satsep red gravels from Kelsey's show are popping up, especially as you go further south. And yeah, we've got these quartzite spuds in spades over here in Eastern Washington. So we're getting closer and closer to the source. Up in northeastern Washington is pretty much everybody agrees is the source of these quartzite rocks. I can't hold it. Here's some of the maps I had made of the Columbia basalt lavas. And sure enough, there's some museum flow, which is the youngest of the Grand Ronde lavas, flowing to frickin' Grays Harbor, man. So it is not a crazy thought to have the Columbia River, at least at one point, flowing to Grays Harbor before the Ice Age, way before the Ice Age. Grandpa Carl and some quartzite gravels telling us that Columbia River story. Skip it. Okay, how are we doing so far? I feel long-winded. I guess I warned you that this is a meandering episode. But I enjoy these, and I hope that you do too. Are we 5 by 5? We are 5 by 5. Let's keep going. We are heading towards a deep dive on the 1919 paper. And before we quit, we'll do some Google Earth with Glenn. Thank you. Okay, so we're still in prior episodes, and I'm reminding you now that T.C. Chamberlain grew up in southern Wisconsin near Beloit. Salisbury grew up on a farm near Delavan, Wisconsin. I grew up on a farm here in Fort Atkinson, but my roots are over in the Glarus, Wisconsin area. I bring that back to you because there is teaching at Beloit College with these guys. Chamberlain, I failed to mention in the Chamberlain show, he taught 2 years high school in Delavan, Wisconsin, just down the road from me. I mentioned that Chamberlain taught at Whitewater and Salisbury was a student at Whitewater. My point is, I want to keep emphasizing that there is a high school teacher history with almost every one of these cats. Not all of them. But a week from today, we're going to talk about high school teachers in Spokane and how key they were in plugging Bretz in to the Spokane area. And I've made these comments before, but I'll make it again right now. I'm married to a high school science teacher. My dad was a high school science teacher. My mom was a public school teacher. 2 of our boys are high school science teachers. I mean, I can relate to high school teachers way more than I can people at universities, to be totally honest with you. And so I think part of this Bretz story, Bretz himself, 6 years of high school teaching, this respect and willingness to exchange information and ideas with lowly high school teachers is a part of the narrative here that fascinates me. Because obviously I value high school teachers, and I guess I'll be bold and say that oftentimes if you are spending your whole life in a university or something like that, you don't really think much of what a high school teacher has to say. So there's many elements to this Bretz story. I think the high school teaching thing is one we can explore together, especially next Thursday. All right, wanted to say that. But finally, we're to the University of Chicago and trying to get a timeline going a little bit more specifically now for this work. You remember these two cats are at University of Chicago during this time, 1914 to 1919. Chamberlain is going to retire in 1919. Salisbury's taking over the geology department at University of Chicago in 1918. And you remember now that they have, by mostly Chamberlain's oversight of all these other folks, including Salisbury, they have mapped out multiple generations of ice advance in the upper Midwest. Here are our current numbers, current guesses, quote unquote, for when those advances happened. But this was the thing, even back at the time. University of Chicago, that's our setting. Okay. Before we go real carefully into the 1919 paper, I have a new timeline that's a little bit more specific. And that gets us to some asks that I might have of you today. Timeline. Did this one last night. I kind of like it. Let's see if it works for you. So we're talking about these 5 years, 6 years, I guess, but maybe we're not even doing this. Maybe I'll save this for Sunday. Okay, let me point out a few things. Use my pointer. So Bretz is leaving Seattle. The brand new house and the new baby, Rudy, they're going back to Chicago, and Bretz starts his career. We know that. That's in the summer of 1914. Green and orange. Orange is this field course that Bretz is inheriting. And I need to go back. Now, let me show it to you first. So Bretz definitely is teaching his beginning students. These are University of Chicago undergraduates. I'm almost sure that's the case, like sophomores and juniors perhaps. And every September, more or less, he's teaching this 3-week field course in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The first time he taught it was September of 1915. Apparently he taught it 1917 and 1918. And you're like, okay, well, how do you know that? Let me go to the slides and go backwards just a second. First of all, Baraboo's up here. And Baraboo is the same thing as saying Devil's Lake. So remember, I went to undergrad here at the University of Wisconsin. It became a joke. Almost every geology class had a field exercise or a field weekend where we'd all go to the same place. We'd all go to Devil's Lake. Go to Devil's Lake for geomorphology. We go to Devil's Lake for petrology. We go for Devil's Lake for structural geology. It was the go-to place for field exercises at the University of Wisconsin, probably still today. But Bretz is down here in Chicago now, and every September he's driving up through my turf, probably driving through my town of Fort Atkinson, Madison, on US 12, and getting up to Baraboo. Okay? Chicago up to the Baraboo Hills. Here are some photos from John Sonicsen's fine book on the life of J. Harlan Bretz. And here's Bretz over here on the right. This is one particular year where they all chose to walk around most days without their shirts on, or at least posing for this photo. So from Bretz's old man memories, he's writing down the names. Now, again, I'm not sure, but I think these are undergraduate students only. These are not graduate students. And that's important in just a second. He doesn't have a Baraboo course in 1916 listed. He does in 1917, but I'm confused by that. Why? Well, here's the first year of the Baraboo course. And again, I won't go back to it, but Eric's fine email help. I think I blew past it too quick, but in Eric's emails, he's like, Bretz was good in the field, and part of the reason he was hired at the University of Chicago was because he was perfectly willing, excited, in fact, to teach field classes. And even today, we have a hard time getting somebody to teach a field course in our department today, because if you've ever taught a geology field course, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of prep. It takes a lot out of you mentally and physically to be in charge of these young people who are full of energy. It's a lot. And Bretz was up to that for sure. He taught this Baraboo class for 30 years, almost every year. But that's not the Pacific Northwest stuff. That's what I'm getting to. It's not the Pacific Northwest stuff. It's just here in Baraboo every year. So I thought maybe once he started this Baraboo course, he would do it every fall. But because of the notebooks that we've been able to get from the University of Chicago, he can't be doing the Baraboo course in 16 because he's still out here until he's out here between. So green is obviously Columbia River Gorge with his advanced students, which are, I guess, senior undergrads and a bunch of grad students as well, although I'm a little fuzzy on that. July 15th to September 15th. And they climbed Mount Hood that summer. This is the advanced students. And in green here, they climbed Mount Adams, and they were out between July 31st and September 21st. So if he's out here September 21st in 19 and September 15th in 16, I don't see how he can do a Baraboo course also at the same time. You know, I get off of it. I don't know why that's important. Well, he does have 1917 listed, but he lists a couple of I'm guessing these are professors, but maybe not. I don't know. I don't get it. How can he be out doing mapping in 19? Oh shit! Am I getting screwed up? Oh, okay. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that. World War I is happening, and apparently, Bretz is not out here in the Pacific Northwest both of these years because of the war. Now, maybe somebody watching will have some evidence to say that that's wrong and he was out here during one of these times. He might have been out here doing field work with some students in the summer of 1915. We have one page of notes of him doing stuff in 1914 before he goes to Chicago. So I can feel some of you checking out. Like, this is too much detail. And where's the geology, by the way? You're giving me a lot of this other stuff. The geology is coming. We're going to go into this paper within 10 minutes, I promise. But I like this timeline thing too, for obvious reasons. And we are bridging the gap between Bretz's Puget Lowland work, which is well documented, and his Eastern Washington Scablands work. But this is a tricky stretch in here. His first few years at the University of Chicago are poorly documented, and I haven't gotten more notebooks in cursive from Bretz from a couple of those years, and the stuff we do have is rather spotty. So we may not be able to tell this part of the story very clearly. And yet there's some help on the way. And do I go to it now? I think I do. We go to Sharon. Viewers like you. Sharon in Malaga has come through big time. She not only sent all this newspaper clipping stuff to me last summer, I asked her quickly yesterday, I'm overwhelmed with all the stuff you sent me, Sharon. Could you repackage what you've sent me by year, please? And she did it within an hour. So to help us here, I think this puts a fine point on it, and I'm coming to this camera because I have an ask. I have no idea if we'll have any success with this. But going back to episode B with Jerome Lessman. I think it was Jerome that said, how come we don't know anything about Bretz's students, especially his graduate students, who he is mentoring? And apparently Bretz out in the field every summer in Eastern Washington is working collaboratively with these graduate students. He's training them, but he's treating them like equals, and they're bouncing ideas back and forth. They just want a bunch of folks to like carry the food. How come we don't know their names? Well, this might be a dead end, but Sharon from Malaga has newspaper clippings for us. And it's a new way to get details about when Bretz is in the Columbia River Gorge with his University of Chicago students. Way to go, Sharon. So yeah, we're doing this. But here's Sharon saying, I found this article in the Chicago Tribune, August 18th, 1916. And if we're losing it, if I'm losing it, where's the timeline? Here. So we're this summer, where Bretz is apparently not doing the Baraboo course. We're before the U.S. involvement in World War I. And I just find this incredibly helpful. A party of University of Chicago students of geology under the direction of J. Hayden Bretz, after research, works in the upper Hood River Valley and observations of the old crater of Mount Hood, scout the idea that smoke has ever been issuing from the extinct volcano. Well, he wasn't really working on that, but I suppose that was what resonated with the newspaper reporter. Bretz said an eruption was not probable. But here's why this is so valuable. We have names of these students who were with J. Harlan Bretz the first summer that he was out here in the Pacific Northwest, the first of many summers that he has University of Chicago students with him. Now, I'm guessing, but I don't know, that these two guys are the grad students and everybody else is like a senior undergrad. These guys too. Why do I guess that? Well, if you take the time, which we'll do in a bit, when we go to my website, you can see the field notes that are typed and ready for you and available. And also Glenn, Google Earth by Glenn will show us in 1916 where those guys went. In the notebook especially, Bretz keeps mentioning McClintock and Cheney. And Cheney was some sort of fossil guy, maybe a grad student that loved fossils and was particularly interested in the Eagle Creek Formation in the guts of the Columbia River Gorge. And McClintock stayed through the end of September as well. So as I understand it, the rest of these folks go home, maybe Labor Day weekend, if there was a Labor Day at that time, probably not. But these two guys stick around. So is it maybe two grad students and a bunch of undergrads? Regardless, there's a lot of students with Bretz this first time. Very helpful and kind of fun. So I don't even know what I'm asking. Can we verify that these are grad students and these are undergrads? Can we figure out how many of these folks went on to become geologists? I don't even really know the benefit of all this. But it's this kind of detail that I think is really fun. Okay, my internal sense seeds, I need to get to that paper. So I'm going to cut this right now, all this timeline and kind of cutesy ancillary stuff. I want to go to the 1919 paper an hour into the program. And then if we feel like we still have some interest, we'll go back to a couple more of these little parallels. What do I have left for the slides, by the way? No, we're there. Okay, it kind of worked. Good. So, all right. So, chapter title, Bretz, Columbia Submergence, 1919. First of all, I love how he lays out the paper. So I'm going to this paper that has this one map in it, but we're now going to carefully go through most of the paper. So his first paragraph, I guess you can call it the abstract, is basically saying, here's what I'm going to do in this paper, everybody. I'm going to make this case for the Columbia Submergence, and I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. Let me write it out for you a little bit more carefully. Hang on. Bretz says, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm going to start by basically doing a literature review. I'm going to read everything I can get my hands on with geologists who have worked in the Pacific Northwest, tangential to this topic over the last 20 years. And those happen to be most of the people we've already talked about in this series. Works out for us. Then he says, I want to eliminate mistakes that those guys were made. They're saying things that I don't think are right. And then I want to take some of those old ideas, the prior work, and I want to make some correlations. There's some connections between some of those things. And then I, J. Harlan Bretz, in 1919, based on my field work with my University of Chicago students, at least in 1916, but possibly 1915 as well, I want to show you new data that I have, breadcrumbs both small and large, to make a case that everything was submerged. And I might even want to correlate it with the work that I've done in Puget Sound. Okay, good. So he starts where we ended in the last show. He's talking about Showalter Bay, which is the old name for Willapa Bay. He's talking about the Deschutes River, written like this. We now spell it like this. And yes, he's talking about the Willamette Valley. But he's not starting from scratch. He's not taking the blindfold off of the train in 1915 and saying, what do we got down here? Let me start working. No, he is actively taking all this prior work. And I may be wrong, but at least in 1918, when Bretz is stuck in Chicago and can't come out here because everybody's at war, he's basically just reading at home. And maybe if it wasn't for World War I and the doughboys, maybe he would have just continued out here in the field work, and maybe he would have not have written this large section on prior work. But regardless, that's what's in the first few pages of this paper. Let's go to it. So I don't want to spend forever on this, but I think it's worth spending a little time on it. So he starts with Condon, Thomas Condon. One of the Oregon viewers sent me this book on Thomas Condon, sent me 2 Thomas Condon books. Said, you've got to learn Thomas Condon. He's got an amazing story. Haven't involved Thomas Condon much until right now. So Bretz is telling us about the Overland Monthly 1871 article. That's waiting for you at nickzentner.com, the whole article. Okay? What's he say about that? Bretz says Condon has a Pleistocene submergence of something he's calling the Willamette Sound. And Condon in 1871, that's going way back now, is imagining a Champlain submergence story. So the Champlain submergence was not Bretz's idea. He's taking his lead from Condon. Okay, move on. Simons. You remember way back, letter C, letter D, Simons is coming down the Columbia River. He's working for the Army Corps of Engineers, but he's getting off the river every once in a while. And Thomas Simons in 1882 is walking down the Grand Coulee and making all sorts of observations and writing them down. Well, Bretz found that paper. Here it is again. His work in the summer of 1881, and then he published in 1882. Each of these papers waits for you again at nickzentner.com. So he's like, well, Simons has got a Lake Lewis in central Washington. And that static water of Simons is over Wallula Gap. It's over by Walla Walla. Simons is talking about erratics floating around in this Lake Lewis that he's calling it. He's trying to describe a basalt plateau that's got some sedimentary layers on top of it. Simons is even talking about these huge terraces made out of gravel. We know now those are major Ice Age floods features. But this is back long ago where Bretz is just to kind of compile these notes essentially. And I'll just say it verbally right now. The 1919 paper is Bretz saying, I'm proposing a Columbia Submergence, which is taking Thomas Condon's Willamette Sound in Western Oregon and taking Thomas Simons's Lake Lewis in Eastern Washington and saying they're not two separate lakes. Those static bodies were once connected through the Columbia River Gorge. And better than that, that big body of water is connected to the ocean. Therefore, I think it was salt water getting all the way to Chelan, Washington. Now, he was wrong about the saltwater part. But if we can just ignore that part of it, there's amazing correlations between these prior works. Very impressive. On he goes to one of his main mentors, Izzy Russell, 1892. We looked at that paper. Now, Russell's talking about a Pleistocene glacial lake. So he's emphasizing that it's a glacial thing. Bretz is noting that back to Simons, he gave no altitudes. He cited no evidence for the age of this thing and suggested no cause for the ponding. He just saw there was a body of water. Russell's the first guy to talk about a glacial lake and was mentioning the White Bluffs had a bunch of sedimentary layers that appeared to be too old for Pleistocene. So if you remember, with Sky Cooley, we had the John Day story. The John Day beds. Sorry, this is still Simons. This is Simons not understanding why there's a lake, but he's got the Northern Pacific Railroad projected in 1882. That's kind of fun. Yakima, Wallula. Here's the Snake River coming in. I mean, this is not an invention of Bretz, Lake Lewis. This is not an invention of Russell, Lake Lewis. It's an invention of Thomas Simons. Amazing. This guy's mostly just working with the Columbia River, and yet he's figuring this out using erratics and other things. So yeah, it's you remember Israel, the guy that suddenly dies after he meets Bretz one and only time, and Samuel and Russell had his right-hand man Samuel, and they're crisscrossing all through here in the spring of 1892. This is more than a decade. This is more than 2 decades before Bretz is cruising around. And I'm reminding you, we've already seen these photos from Russell and Sam. Here they are up at Chelan. I'm not talking about Russell in the early 1890s. And Russell, I can't hold it. Russell is saying, look, these incredible terraces, the Great Terrace and Lower Terraces, these are terraces that are building right into a lake. And the lake is my Lake Lewis, is Simons's Lake Lewis. And Bretz is saying one better than that. I don't think it's Lake Lewis. I think it's this saltwater submergence from Astoria, Oregon, all the way up here to Chelan, Washington. We doing okay? You hanging in there? We're into the meat of today, whether you wanted it or not. It was playtime and making connections with other past episodes. Right now, we're in deep with this featured paper from 1919. And we'll back out again and play with Google Earth and a couple other things before we go to your live questions and answers. Thank you. More than 900. Wonderful. So Yeah, we've got Russell also talking about erratics now in the Columbia River Valley. He's also got erratics in the Yakima River Valley. This is Russell. And Russell's the first guy to think maybe there was an ice dam in the Columbia River Gorge at a place where Hood River is flowing north and enters the Columbia River at a town called Hood River today. So Russell's wondering if that Lake Lewis is there because the water can't get through the Columbia River Gorge. Russell is also suggesting that maybe the ocean entered the Great Central Valley between the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains. So even okay, kind of forgot that. Even the big mistake, even Bretz's big mistake of saltwater getting all the way up to Chelan, Washington, was not his idea. Russell proposed it apparently in one of those 1890s papers. Russell saying, allow the ocean to enter the Great Central Valley between the Cascades and the Rockies. I'm going to pick it up just a bit, but we go on to Diller, which we're not really going to talk much about Diller in this series, but he was a Western Oregon geologist. His paper awaits for you. Diller's noticing a bunch of erratics, and he's talking about a Pleistocene story. Remember, this is a big issue. We've got, maybe you're getting confused. It's been a few letters since we thought about this, but we're essentially back to Eastern Washington, and we're now really thinking about the Ice Age. You remember before Christmas and even before Thanksgiving, we were in Eastern Washington, but we were below 3 million years ago. We were older than 3 million years ago. We were pre-Ice Age, Ringgold and John Day and that sort of stuff. Well, we're back. We're back to Eastern Washington, but now these guys are wrestling with, is it pre-Ice Age or is it Ice Age? And guys like Diller are coming in and saying, no, this is Ice Age, man. What are you doing? This is Ice Age. And Russell, in a later paper in 1898, a paper that I had not seen, and Jim O'Connor sent to me, thank you, Jim, published in 1898, the Great Terrace is a delta built into Lake Lewis, and the Lake Lewis goes all the way north to Chelan. Again, that's Russell, not Bretz. So now Bretz is taking all that prior work and he's starting to criticize and saying it's not really static water. There's quartzites in this story. And the quartzites are indicating a vigorous current coming down the Columbia. And again, Bretz is saying, look, I've been out finding all these quartzite breadcrumbs, and I think there's a flow here. It's not just static water, at least at times. Bretz takes on Condon. Maybe I'm pitching this the wrong way. But he's talking that he's got no positive evidence for the existence of the Willamette Sound. I'm getting lost here a little bit. Let me just keep blowing off steam on some of this. He's basically just kind of critically evaluating some of these prior efforts. A Portland Terrace that we can ask Jim O'Connor about on Sunday. Then Bretz starts involving brand new papers, brand new at the time, right? 1917, there was a White Bluffs paper by Merriman. And those guys love that bunch of the White Bluffs is very late Cenozoic, probably Pleistocene. And they've got high water marks now, or at least no. So Bretz is saying, look, there's a west, forgetting what I'm doing here now. I'll let you read that. I'm starting to get hung up myself. Let me just say something quick. There's a lot here. There's a lot of detail here. It's not only geology detail, but then it's all this other kind of personal history detail. And I'm just reminding you that I sometimes struggle with how much detail to get into. And in a show like today, I think I'm almost acting as a conduit. It's maybe a cop-out, but maybe what I'm saying is that each of these old papers is there for you. And if you have the time and the interest, you can go directly to these papers and see for yourself how Bretz is thinking and reasoning this out. And I'm talking to myself right now, essentially, even though I'm looking at you. I'm like, I don't have to have every detail figured out, I don't think. Because I'm getting confused right now as I read my chicken scratch as I go here. All right. Let me open this door again. I got probably 10 more minutes of this detail, another 10 minutes of Google Earth and field notes, and then we come to you with live questions. Or maybe we'll do the questions earlier and then play with the Google Earth after that. It's the maiden voyage of the Google Earth thing. Okay, if I go to the desktop, there's the Great Terrace paper. It waits for you. In the middle of all this, Bretz is spending a summer, at least a month, assisting Ira Williams, essentially writing the first roadside geology book ever, as far as I can tell. This is a brand new highway that's being constructed in the 19-teens. And with these brand new exposures, as they're blasting along, get this road in, Bretz is heavily involved in this story. And again, thanks to Jim O'Connor for sending a fine copy of this my way. We can go wherever Jim O'Connor wants to go on Sunday, but these are classic landmarks that most of us know in the Columbia River Gorge. Here's this gorgeous highway, which is still available on certain, if you have a little extra time driving to Portland, you can get on certain segments of this old highway. Viewers, if you have time and interest, would you have a few more old photos that are good looking, that are from that time of building the Columbia River Highway? Was a guy named Sam Hill involved? How involved was Sam Hill? Who in Sam Hill? Who? This guy named Sam Hill, who's I think of mostly around the Goldendale, Washington area. I don't know how much Sam Hill was involved in boosting that project, but I might be able to add a little bit more of a very specific visual, because a lot of people know that old highway. Even if you don't, if you're driving to Portland on the freeway and you notice every once in a while there's a bunch of traffic or a little bit of traffic up on this elevated old highway. Like, what's that about? Well, it's a paper that had a grand opening 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. And Bretz was involved in writing the roadside geology book with Williams. And then, yes, these quote unquote modern papers, 1917, Schwennison, and then the one by Merriam. So Bretz is trying to take all that effort and comment on it in the paper that we have been trying to feature today. Okay, I might as well. We'll go back to Sharon. We're going to peek ahead to the summer of 1919. I just can't help it. And same idea. I think we'll look at this more carefully on Sunday. But my point is that Bretz is back. World War II is done. He's got a couple. World War I is done. We got a couple of doughboys who are actually coming out with him in the field. They're climbing Mount Adams in 1919. And he's got two football players from the University of Chicago who are like training for the upcoming season by being out with Bretz in the Columbia Gorge right before practice starts. And I mention that simply because there's another Canute in this episode. Some of you know the name Knute Rockne, and he was a long time and very famous football coach at the University of Notre Dame. And this is my grandpa, my mom's dad, who played football for Rockne and then went on to be a pro football player for the Cardinals when they played in Chicago in the early 1920s. And the only reason I mention that is that there's an intersection, I think, between these football players for the University of Chicago, who were geology students under Bretz in the Columbia Gorge and climbing Mount Adams, and my grandpa, who I never met. He died before I was born. But Clyde was training with people who played football in Chicago. And I would there's a chance that there's an overlap between my grandpa, who's trying to train for the NFL, and these University of Chicago football players. Because my grandpa spent his whole life in Woodstock, Illinois, and would take the train in for football practice. And it can't be that big of a scene down there. Thank you for that indulgence. Okay, is that it for the slides? Right, my grandpa, Clyde, Notre Dame. Yeah, what are the odds that my mom, Mary Zoya, Italian-American, and my dad, Carl Zentner, Swiss-American, met each other and got married. Two Z's marrying each other. And she took my dad's name, as was the custom in 1961. Okay, what am I doing? We're done with the slides. I think we're going to do live question and answer right now. I'm going to pause one more time to see if there's anything else big from the paper, or maybe your comments will get me to the... we're going to do one more thing. Sorry, one more thing before we get to your live questions. So Bretz is knocking down some of these proposed ideas of the prior workers, including the idea that a glacier came down the Hood River Valley and blocked the Columbia River and therefore made Lake Lewis, because Bretz says, I've been looking in the Hood River Valley for erratics up high, and I've also found moraines, some older moraines and some younger moraines in the Hood River Glacier, older, bigger, smaller, younger. And at the same time, they're not getting down to the elevation of the Columbia River. They're stopping short. So there's no evidence, there's no glacial deposit evidence at the mouth of the Hood River to back up this idea that ice ever blocked the Columbia River Gorge, something that he would continue to have an issue with. All through the 1930s, Bretz was dealing with critics who said, I think that there was an ice dam in the Columbia River Gorge. I can't hold it. When we finally finish the featured paper of today, I assume this is still from 1916, but maybe Glenn can correct us. If Glenn's here in real time, he can help us maybe. But here's, in 1916, I'll just say, Bretz and his students, maybe just the two grad students hanging around in September. Look at this country that these guys are covering. Canby, Oregon. He's noticing erratics. This is Bretz now. 1916, he's getting into Eastern Washington. Viewers, does anybody live near Prosser? Is there any way somebody could find that rock if it still exists? It probably doesn't. I think I would know about it. It looks like a pretty big one. Look at, there's a hammer for scale. It'd be fun to find that and rephotograph it if it still exists. I don't know if he gives a direction there. North of Prosser. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff that Glenn was able to punch in, not from the published paper, but look at this man. He's here. And now that I say that, some of this maybe is taken from what he's read about from Russell and Simons, and maybe he hasn't been to every specific spot. And so that's where these notebooks come in. Okay, I changed my mind. I'm not going to your live questions yet. It's time to do Google Earth. Just we're thinking about that right now. And then I promise we're coming to live questions. Thank you for your patience. Okay, this is a big moment. I'm going to try to use Google Earth live with you for the first time. And you're like, come on, it's not that hard. Well, I'm not a Google Earth user, and it will be cumbersome. I just saw Sean Wilsey this morning is flying a drone live from his office in Twin Falls, Idaho, and he's flying a drone in Iceland. I have no idea how that works. So I'm not up to Sean Wilsey's speed with flying drones and dealing with flying around, period. But we're going to try this anyway. So goodbye, Grandpa. Let's just get rid of it. Goodbye, slides. Yes. So the papers we're talking about today are all here. Condon, Simons, Russell, Diller, Russell again, Williams, that's the Columbia River Gorge roadside book, Merriman, Schwennison, and then this is the paper we've been highlighting today, all of those. So that was easy to pick these. These are just all the papers that Bretz is referring to. And as I mentioned, they're available for you to investigate. But if we click on Bretz, not floods, but if we click on Bretz, it's been a while since we've done that. Glenn has a revised document to help you if you're a rookie like I am. And Bretz has typed field notes from 1916. What do they look like? They look like these. I'm going to forget your names now. Now I got it. Margaret in Spokane, Jeff in Portland, viewers. Margaret said, I think I have found some Bretz notes, some field notes that are being stored in a Portland historical museum or historical society or something like that. And Jim O'Connor, our guest on Sunday, emailed me and said, I heard through the grapevine that you've heard of some notes of Bretz in downtown Portland. That's like 4 blocks away from me. Can you send me that tip? So I forwarded Margaret's email to Jim. Within 10 minutes, he had called over to the museum, Jim O'Connor, our guest on Sunday. He said, could you please digitize those notes if they exist? Somebody found them. They digitized them within an hour. And then Jeff in Portland said, I have a friend who works at a library and I heard about this and I just heard that they're digitized and here they are. So Jeff emailed them to me and then I emailed Jim O'Connor and I said, did you know these were digitized? He said, well, yeah, I guess it's because I just called over and asked. So all this happened within just a couple of hours on a weekday morning a couple of weeks ago, thanks to those folks. And so for the first time, perhaps ever, I don't know, we have these notes from the summer of 1916 where we have locations and we have dates and we have Bretz assisting Ira Williams, but Bretz also has those Chicago students I just told you about. And I forwarded this to Glenn and Glenn punched these into Google Earth. So you see what I mean by all this detail that's there, but I'm not going through each page of the notes. That is viewer discretion. Viewer discretion is advised. All I'm saying is there are deep rabbit holes here, and they're at least available to you. That's my point. Most of this stuff just wasn't available to us until now. So it feels great to just shed some light and blow the dust off of some of these notes. But then when we finally get to Google Earth in a sec, Glenn's like, get to it. We can go there. So that's the typed 1916. I'll let you read the Google Earth. Sorry. I'll let you read the Google Earth help if you're brand new to this, but you're basically downloading KMZ files. And here's the file from Google Earth set up by Glenn. And then I'm going to save the 1919 and 1920 stuff until the next show, I think. So let's try Google Earth. I didn't even open it because of the problems I had starting the program. So let's just see if I can open Google Earth Pro and get it on the desktop. And you'll hold me, won't you? You'll hold me and protect me? Okay. So this is Google Earth, and it looks like the files that I have loaded into Google Earth have been remembered. Glenn coached me up on getting stuff out of temporary places and getting them into my places. And so I think this trick works. If I double click on Bretz 1916, Here's Glenn giving us some detail on where he got this stuff. It's basically Margaret and Jeff. And so we're on Google Earth. And if I click on Bretz's 1916 field notes, you're like, what is this? Well, each of these green thumbtacks was punched in specifically by Glenn. This is the same Glenn we're talking about. We did a whole episode with him. Do you remember before Christmas? That's the guy we're talking about. With us today. And let me go back. So let's not bury the lead. The lead is it's 1916, and Bretz and his University of Chicago students, at least two of them, are taking the train. They don't have any cars, and they are covering ground between Astoria, Oregon, and Yakima, Washington. And what Glenn has done for us, if I click on, let me come back in with, oh shit. Goldendale Pebbles, okay? So this is from page 69 of the typed field notes. And Goldendale to the summit on Yakima Road. I assume that Sadist Pass. There's quartzite pebbles. These are the breadcrumbs, the quartzite Hansel and Gretel pebbles, abundant on the surface in the eastern part of Goldendale. I mean, I was with Jim O'Connor in the field a couple of summers ago. He took me right there. He knew about those quartzite cobbles right along US 97. Jim, did you know about them because of Bretz's notes? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So what can I do? We're going to do two things. We're going to do uppercase live question and answer. And I think we're also just going to have a little Google Earth session here. Those that are comfortable and familiar with this, especially if Glenn is with us, we'll just play here a little bit before we quit. Because there's like street view and stuff. I kind of forgot about that. Hang on. Okay, hang on now. What if I want to go? What was Glenn showing us? If I want to go to I don't know why, but I want to go to Hood River. That came up. Oh, we'll go to Bingen instead. Sorry. And if I do street view, I'm going to get down to Bingen. This is on the Washington side. And that gluten-free bakery was there when J. Harlan Bretz came through the gorge. That's not true, number one. And number two, I don't think it stands for gluten-free necessarily. Okay, I'm in Google. How do I find what's... Okay. Uppercase, please. Live questions. And maybe I have some answers, or maybe I'll delay to try to answer some of your questions until we get Jim O'Connor, the expert, with us on Sunday. And then if we feel like it, we'll do a little bit more with Google Earth. But that was my first half-assed attempt to get rolling with it. I see a bunch of laughing icons. I don't blame you. David, any chance of a geomapping pop-up? So much is based on IT. I would rather a little more insight. Not sure, David. Roger, do we see 4 set beds in the Great Terrace? Okay, that is from the, can I find it? Thank you, Roger. Maybe I'll hold off with O'Connor with that. But either Bretz or Russell was saying something like, if we can find some 4 set beds or some top set beds or something with those gravels, that's going to seal the deal on whether those gravels were dumping into Lake Lewis, I think is what was being said. I'm not prepared for that question. Appreciate it. Jacko Taco, Morocco. Has any evidence been found of past flows on the divide between the Cowlitz and Chehalis? Not sure, but I don't think our Ice Age floods are crossing into the Chehalis. That's an interesting thought. if we have 150,000-year-old gravels, and we are convincingly showing that the age is right to have them being tied to an outburst flood or outwash in general, are we sure it's all coming from the Puget Lowland? Jerome Lessman's with us. Submergence plus marine transgression was proposed by British Columbia by George Dawson in 1875. Ignore the phone. It was a popular idea to explain observations that were eventually better explained by... Okay, thank you, Jerome. Edward. Hi, Edward. You're down in Yakima. Haven't seen you in a while. Could the Goldendale pebbles be from old channel of the Columbia River? Yes, I think that's the story. So maybe that's something I should do with Jim on Sunday. I don't want to do much before I bring him in, but maybe I want to reinforce. Yeah, I think we're getting confused, and maybe Bretz was confused about the quartzites being mostly a pre-Ice Age flood story. I don't know how to do that exactly, but you're right. Many of the blonde quartzites are from the John Day beds or the Ringgold Formation, and they are pre-3 million years ago. Let's keep it going. This is helpful. Lon, did Bretz ever connect the blonde cobbles to where they came from? Good question. We are going to follow him every summer. We're going to read his notes every summer. Let's keep an eye out for that, Lon. You can do that right now if you want. I don't know. As we understand it now, the quartzite bedrock is in northeastern Washington up by Chewelah, but did he know that? Not sure. This is fun. Many of your answers are available to you now with these notebooks if you want to look ahead, but that's a cop-out. I need to do something here. Brian, is there evidence of detrital zircons from the Columbia River in Grays Harbor or Willapa Bay? These guys, both Wells and Rydell, both said, there's promise for that idea, but we don't have the evidence to nail it down that the Columbia was coming through. So did anybody really look for detrital zircons in the mouth of the Columbia when it used to flow into Willapa Bay or Grays Harbor? I guess not. Am I answering any questions? Do blonde quartzites have more fun? Yes. There, I answered a question. Sky, when does Bretz abandon the seawater inundation hypothesis? Now, that's an interesting question. So I know, the only reason I know that Bretz regretted writing the paper was because of Vic Baker. I've heard it a number of times, just with talks that I've heard from Vic Baker, and maybe some of you have as well. So does Bretz ever say in print that I was wrong and it wasn't a saltwater submergence? Probably not. When does he abandon the seawater inundation hypothesis? Well, I don't know. I don't think there's any talk of it in 1922, but we're a little ahead of ourselves now. I'll say it because it's on my mind lately. Oh, let's do it. Let's do it. I'll come back to your questions. Let's do it. We're back to Sharon. Did I bring it in? Sharon's newspaper accounts, I just think are so fascinating. It's a totally new way to try to put a story together. And you're like, it is? Like, yeah, I think it is, at least in this kind of stuff. I didn't bring it in. Sharon found a newspaper account of Bretz and some of his University of Chicago students, including Richard Foster Flint, 1921. They're climbing Adams. She's got the newspaper account. I'll share it with you next time. But we have no notebooks. We got no Google Earth by Glenn for 1921. So I don't know how I can expedite the University of Chicago to scan some notes for me and for us by Sunday. That's probably not going to happen. But I think there's a whole summer's worth of field notes and work that nobody knows about. And the only evidence we had that Bretz came out in 21 was the Chicago Tribune article or whatever it was. So that could be a huge part of this that nobody knows about. I don't know what question prompted me to that. Oh, yeah. When does he abandon the seawater inundation? Maybe he talks about that then. Anna from Portugal. How many places Bretz sees with quartzite? He sees a bunch. And if you page through that 1919 paper, Anna, you'll see each of those locations. I'm so scrambled now. Yeah, I've got it. Thank you for the question. So Bretz, each of these places, Anna, you can look up on Google Earth, or you can see Glenn's work on Google Earth if you want to do that. And he's telling us about boulders. He's telling about what the lithology or what type of rock is in the boulders. He's on the Yakima firing range. That's what Dry Creek Valley and Cold Creek Valley are. This is Bretz, 1916. Sorry. It has to be 1916 because he's out here in 1919, but this paper is published like 2 months later, even like 1 month later. There's no way there can be that kind of turnaround. So that's why I think he wrote this 1919 paper before the field season of 1919. And I just don't think he was out here in 1918 because everybody was over in Europe. So Anna, yeah, he's got a striated quartzite boulder. That's how they spelled boulder back in the day. So he's noting granites and quartzites, angular granite and quartzites. This is Autanum Ridge by Yakima. I mean, a month ago, I had no idea that Bretz was tromping around in Eastern Washington in 1916. I think that's really fun. I'm down to live. Let's do a few more. I might get bold and try a little bit more Google Earth if somebody wants to give me a tip. David McWalter. Hello, David. A couple dozen people showed up last Sunday to visit with David McWalter at the Dry Falls Visitor Center. Thank you, David, for coming in on your day off. How does the diatomaceous earth layers near George relate to the glacial lakes? Thank you for the question. I do need to hit this hard on Sunday. David, if you come back on Sunday, you're probably working, but it'll be 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. That's what I want to do before I bring in O'Connor. The diatomaceous earth layers are 16 million years old. And our glacial lake stuff is younger than 1 million years old, most of it. And so it's easy to get confused because we have lake stories from the Miocene, 16 million. We have lake stories today from the Pleistocene, less than 1 million. And we need to separate those two things for sure. And we did that with the John Day beds before Thanksgiving, but it's too long ago now. We need to do it again. So I've already decided that's how we want to start Sunday's show. Thank you very much. 3 more. You guys are all asking about the Columbia, and I understand why. Out of all the programs I've done, that Ancient Rivers of the Pacific Northwest lecture is very, very popular, and I think it's because we all know what these rivers look like. These are known things. We don't have to squint and think about the Columbia River. It's freaking right over there. Oh, the Snake River? No, I fish in it or whatever. I jet ski on it. And so these are known family members, essentially, these rivers, the Wenatchee River, the Yakima River. And then if you talk about that friend of yours, a river flowing in a different place, everybody can visualize that. That's what I've learned from making video programs. The episodes that people can visualize things work the best. So what was your question? Sorry. Something about flowing by Mount Adams? I already lost your question. I'm sorry. What's the purpose of this? I'm not even going to read your question. William O. Smith. Where was the Columbia before Mount Adams and St. Helens in relationship to the Yellowstone hotspot? Difficult to say, William. But generally, the Columbia was flowing along the margin of the Columbia River basalts. And that's really the question of where did the Columbia River basalt edge work from Cle Elum, Washington down to Portland, Oregon? Thank you for the question. Yeah, you're all asking about the Columbia River. I guess that's maybe I shouldn't have included that in this episode because it's a distraction for us. The Columbia River pathway story is way too old for what we're doing in this series, except for diverting the Columbia River down the Grand Coulee when the Okanagan Lobe is in places, which is where we're headed. Scrolling back, looking for one more. You're all asking about it. Wow. Trevor, are we sure salt water is coming in from the Pacific, or is it remnants of an inland sea similar to Great Salt Lake pre-50, 55,000 years ago? Thank you for the question, Trevor. I think that goes too far afield with today's paper. Bretz is taking 2 lakes that have been worked out by prior workers. I've said this before, but I'll say it again to close this episode. Simons in the 1880s says, we got a lake here in central Washington. We're going to call it Lake Lewis, and I have evidence for sediments at the bottom of the lake, and I've got rafted blocks of rock, erratics, ice rafted erratics around the margin. I think we have a lake, a freshwater lake. I think we have a lake in eastern Washington. And before that, in the 1870s, Thomas Condon in the Willamette Valley between Portland and Eugene says, I think we got a lake down here. And I'll add one thing. He also had Condon had a lake in the Deschutes River. And so if we have a lake in Willamette Valley, and if we have a lake in Deschutes River Valley, and if we have a lake in eastern Washington, Bretz says, well, if you got lakes in all those places, how about the gorge that's in between those locations? That has to be underwater too. So he says, let's just synthesize, let's just correlate, let's just broaden out and say it's all a body of water. It's all a static body of water from Astoria, Oregon to Chelan, Washington. And Bretz says that the only thing that makes sense is to have a Champlain-like submergence where sea level is high for some reason and the seawater is getting all the way to Chelan. In the 1920s, he gets off of that because he realizes the water's not coming from the ocean, the water's coming from the north. And then apparently he changes his mind and says the water's coming from the east in Montana. I'm going to do a toast to you, and then if you want to stick around, I want to learn a little bit of Google Earth from you before we quit, just a little bonus time before we sign off. A toast to you. Here's to you for joining us for today's episode, episode M, entitled Columbia Submergence. Thank you. Here's to all of you for showing up live, and a special thanks to the geologists who've shown up live. I think possibly we had all, we got Joel and Sky and Jerome all in here together. Thank you for that endorsement, fellas, for what's going on here. But more important than them is you. And thank you for continuing to attend these sessions and participate live or watch them in replay. Here in 2024, we can hope for the best for a healthy year to come. Thank you. Let's look at the schedule before I sign off. Please join us again, if you like, on Sunday morning, January 7th at 9 o'clock Pacific time. That's in the morning. And our guest will be Jim O'Connor, U.S. Geological Survey. We're bringing in the heavy lumber now, okay? These guys have spent a full career thinking about these topics and not teaching either. So it's like hardcore research the whole time. So O'Connor has a surplus of stuff to share with us. Plus, he loves old photos and old papers and everything else. So he's a perfect guest for this series. And hopefully some of what we did today will play right into what we do with Jim O'Connor. on Sunday morning. Thank you. I love you and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Thumbs up to you for joining us today. See you Sunday morning. Hey, everybody. Let's do a little Google Earth. You got some tips for me? I want to learn 3 new tricks before we say goodbye. If I click back to double click on this to get out, I'm going to look for uppercase, and thanks for sticking around. 3 new tricks. The street view is cool, but I don't know how to use it unless I'm looking for something specific. And I only know how to zoom in. Isn't there something with right click or like control click? I'm using a Mac. Anybody want to coach me up on something specific? I just can't believe he's got up to Yakima. Use the mouth to zoom in and out. Okay, well, here's what my mouse looks like. So I got one of these wireless mouse for Mac. There's not really a center button or anything. So that's what I'm working with. I don't know if that helps you or not. Use the scroll wheel, zoom in and out. Okay, I think I know how to do that. So if I go like, wait, no, here. Okay. Yeah, I'm using my, well, I'm doing an obscene gesture, actually. I don't need to expand on that. Thanks, that helps. So instead of the pluses and minuses, I can just flick towards. Viewer discretion is advised. I can flick towards me. No, away from me, zooms out, flicking towards me. Okay, that's very helpful. Trevor, was that you? Thank you. Okay, that's 1. I need 2 more to go. Upper right. Oh, Glenn, you are here. Thank you, Glenn. Upper right hand control. Drag the pegman down to the area. Upper right hand control. Upper right hand. Well, you mean the pegman is here? But like, Glenn, what do I? Okay, Horsetail Bluffs. That seems promising. So if I flick towards Horsetail Bluffs, and Glenn says, get the pegman down here. Okay. And then the Horsetail Bluffs are up in the, like what? How can I use the pegman more effectively, Glenn or other people? Sky suggests, ask Jim, Quartzite source, how much of Bretz's hidden archive did Jim already have? Apparently he hadn't seen those notes in 1916. I'll spoil that already. That's kind of fun. Thank you, Sky, for the ideas. Image overlay, that's beyond me at the moment, but I know that's possible, Kenneth. Thank you. Pegman gives me road cut views. Thank you, Carla. Street views are to locations that are right next to the road. Look for SV suffix. Okay, let's try that before I quit. Exit street view. Oh, you son of a bitch. Glenn, you put SView suffix when you had a street view that was worth it? But I'm getting the SV. I bet you I can only see the SV if I double click on the pin, right? How quick are you, Glenn? Can you find an SV from 1916 that I can try right now? Uncheck some more years. Well, you're not sure if there's an SV for 1916? Yakima Field Office. Okay. So apparently in the note, oh, thank you. Nice job. So apparently Bretz is like, yeah, we made it by train or whatever, all the way up here. Flick away. All the way up here to Yakima. And they found the Reclamation Bureau office to like look at a map or something, I think. Is that okay? So now I'm supposed to do Street View. Oh shit. Oh boy, do I have to, should I open this first? That is Street View, isn't it? Oh, okay. So Bretz's Walk, I know that building. That's the courthouse. Thankfully, I haven't been in there for personal reasons. The William O. Douglas Federal Building. Maybe it's not a courthouse. So that's fun. Glenn, are you saying like Bretz walked in there possibly to look at a map? Okay. All right, SV. Yeah, I'll know to look for that. And I might, as I prep, yeah, as I prep for future sessions with Google Earth, maybe I'll make a keen eye for those street views to plan if we want to go to an outcrop. And that's maybe what you were thinking all along. Okay, good. Okay, another toast for you late guys. A toast to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's how tough I am. Thank you. I love you and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Hope that one worked for you. I love you. And I love you. Goodbye.